Okay, welcome to the Larkspur City Council meeting for August 7th. Can we start out with a roll call, please?
Councilmember Andre,
Here.
Councilmember Paulson,
Here.
Vice Mayor Way,
Here.
Mayor Kandel.
I am here. Okay, next, if you can, please rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you for that. The next item on the agenda is public hold everything. Folks.
Mayor, we just need to have the council confirm that it's okay with having Councilmember Way participate remotely under AB 2449.
Everybody in favor, say aye. Aye. Everybody against, say no. Hearing none, it passes.
Thank you, guys. I tested positive for COVID and I don't want to cough around everybody.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda, we have public comment. This is for something not on the agenda. If you have something you would like to speak about that's not on the agenda, now would be your chance. Come on up.
Before we start, am I supposed to give these papers here? This little handout?
Yes, to the clerk, please.
2, 3, and one for staff and one for Councilmember Way when she's available. One for me. I will explain this when I.
Hey, James, am I gonna have to do the 3-minute timer for you? You gonna?
No, I think I'm well with it.
Okay.
James Holmes, Larkspur. Zoom bombing has faded into well-deserved oblivion, and COVID is back with a bang, as you see. Thus, there is no justification for Larkspur not to join the vast majority of other municipalities and special districts like MMWD, the TAM district, and the 2 central marine safety agencies to which Larkspur belongs, and reinstate remote meeting participation. Failure to do this will not only arbitrarily and unreasonably deny to Larkspur residents an opportunity enjoyed by residents of similarly situated communities, but it will also, and apropos of Councilmember Way, needlessly and heedlessly expose seniors and other vulnerable people to COVID if they attend large public meetings. And this concern is especially acute because Larkspur has just scheduled public meetings regarding the draft housing element, likely the most controversial issue in a long time. And at the last meeting on this subject, this room was packed, standing room, tensions rising until staff brought in extra chairs, let people sit on the dais, on the tables, and everywhere else. Don't let the housing element meetings be a super spreader. Bring back remote comment. Finally, speaking of the housing element, that very element states that your policy is supposed to allow remote participation. Here is the language which I have given you highlighted. It reads, the city shall increase community participation in the planning process among traditionally underrepresented groups. Allow for continued virtual meetings alongside in-person public meetings to allow more residents and other stakeholders to participate in public meetings conveniently. That says it all. It's not technically enforced yet, but given the upcoming meetings, you should reinstate at once the remote participation that your draft policy prescribes. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Other public comment at this point, something not on the agenda. Seeing none, we will close public comment. We are not allowed to comment on public comments from the dais, but maybe I can say that it may be time to revisit the remote meetings, being that we do have some meetings coming up with large participation. COVID is up. I wouldn't be against discussing that at a future meeting to determine if council would be in favor of that. All right, having said that, let's move on to item 3, which is presentations, which there are none. So let's move to item 4, which is the approval of the consent calendar. Would anybody on the council like to discuss a matter on the consent calendar?
Mayor Candell, yes, I would like to discuss item 4 point, or what is it? The JPA amendment, which is, I believe is item 4.8. Yes,
Okay, so we have item 4.8. Is there any other items that should be discussed that's on the consent calendar? Vice Mayor Way, anything you would like to pull from the consent calendar? Okay, can I get a vote on all items other than 4.8 on the consent calendar? Actually, I'm sorry, let me go to the public. Is there anyone in the public that would like to pull an item off the consent calendar for discussion? Seeing none, can I get a motion from council to pass the consent calendar excluding item 4.8?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
I second.
Can I get a motion? Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Andre,
Yes,
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way,
Yes,
Mayor Candell.
Yes. Okay, so motion passes with the exclusion of 4.8. Can we get a staff report regarding item 4.8, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and council members, and I'll preface my comments that I had the opportunity to speak with Councilmember Andre offline about this. And so I do have a recommendation based on our conversation. So the Marin Wildfire Protection Agency, Prevention Agency, they went through an exercise first at a staff level and then later at the board level to evaluate the JPA document, the Joint Powers Agreement, that's the underlying charter or governing document of the authority. They did this because it's been a few years and it was time to see if the practical realities of running a new agency lined up correctly with the document itself. And as a result of this exercise, the first working group and then the board adopted recommendations that are now being circulated to the member agencies to make various amendments. Most of those amendments were discussed in brief in the staff report itself. However, there was one that wasn't addressed in the staff report. This was a significant matter, and that's that within the language for section 4 or 5, section 5, the proposed amendments would remove some language that said that all the member agencies need to agree before a tax can be put on the ballot. Some agencies do that, but this is a 17-member agency, and there's a lot of complications to the way the language was crafted. It wasn't the intent of the original drafters, and I can say that with confidence because I was part of the committee that wrote the document. It wasn't our intent to create a system that required 18 hearings before the future tax renewal for MWPA could go on the ballot. However, Councilmember Andre raised a valid point, which is the language as crafted means that it wouldn't come back to each jurisdiction to at least have a conversation about what's being proposed. So I've spoken with the MWPA staff about an idea to approve what's before you tonight, but make certain that before any tax ends up on the ballot, every jurisdiction has a chance at its council or board to have that discussion. And that would be to amend the bylaws of the board of the MWPA to state that they would solicit an advisory vote from every member agency before they would put something on the ballot. That would still bring it here, but it wouldn't create the convoluted problem of what if one agency can't vote for it or doesn't agree with every single nuance, and would guarantee that every community would still have an opportunity to say to its elected officials whether they supported the tax or not. And it would give each board or council the opportunity to tell its voting member how it would like that person to vote on the issue. I spoke with the MWPA staff. They're very supportive of that idea. They think it's an excellent compromise to keep the member agencies informed and participating, but eliminate this legal issue that they've identified in the code.
So does that mean we should pass on this and wait until this is?
No, our
amended?
recommendation is that you adopt this tonight,
Okay.
give the authority to sign it, but also incorporate into your motion that we will write to the MWPA board our suggestion that the bylaws be amended to require an advisory vote by all the member agencies.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilman Andre, do you have any questions for staff or things you'd like to discuss with council about this issue?
So a couple of questions. So if your sense is the MWPA would be open to this idea, because if it doesn't pass, then we're stuck with this language. If the bylaws amendment doesn't pass, and does that require a 50% vote or 3/4, or what's the threshold for passing the change in the bylaws?
Yeah, I don't want to spend ton of time with the unusual way MWPA does voting, but it's essentially, it needs a majority vote. But it also needs a vote that reflects a majority of the population that's served by MWPA. So they do, I'm sure Councilmember Paulson and Vice Mayor Way can attest, they do this sort of unusual calculation when they have votes at MWPA. Essentially, let's just say it's going to take half the board to approve it. I would be stunned if this didn't have universal support at the board, because I think it was never anybody's intent when we were going through and looking at these amendments to take away community's opportunity to weigh in. But the way this language is crafted, it could create a problem where the process would temporarily come to a halt, and a ballot measure opportunity might be missed. And you have to bear in mind, this agency needs one tax renewed every 10 years. And so the goal is to make sure that process stays on its timeline.
So can you tell us what would be the harm if we didn't pass this today and we just postponed it and said we'll revisit it once the bylaws are amended?
I'd have to ask the MWPA staff. I mean, other agencies have this on their agendas too, to authorize signatures for it. So I guess the answer is, until everybody either approves these or doesn't approve these, they can't move forward with the amendments themselves. So
Right,
I don't
but-
have an answer if there's a consequence. I'd have to check.
So, right, so if we didn't do this and we said, listen, we'd be happy to, once you first amend the bylaws, to make sure we are passing what we want to pass and not pass what we don't want to pass, hoping you're going to fix it later. Is there any reason not to do that?
No, I don't think there is. I think this is a trust issue. I have a lot of trust in this agency that this will be done, but I can appreciate if you might want to take a more hesitant approach.
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, can I chime in a minute? And maybe Gabe Paulson can, because I've only been attending a couple of times to the MWPA meetings, but Gabe has been attending a lot before me. This has been worked on by the staff and their attorneys and many of the member agencies, and also the management team for a long time now, I think almost a year. And I correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I think they're under a bit of a time crunch because of the merger of Mill Valley and Southern Marin Fire, changing one of the agencies. We used to have 17. Now we've merged one agency into two agencies into one. And this has something to do with some of the timing of some ballot measures, et cetera, that are happening within different agencies. So I think I feel very comfortable with passing it the way it is. I appreciate Stephanie bringing forward concerns, because the taxation measure is definitely something we need to have a fiduciary responsibility for. They're not bringing forward a tax measure for a couple more years because this is a 10-year tax measure. So there is time for alteration in the mechanism in which Dan just outlined for us. I'm comfortable with it as it is, knowing that that they are responsive to input on how to better articulate this.
I suppose another option, Mr. Mayor, is that you approve this conditionally and you authorize the mayor to sign it upon confirmation from MWPA that the bylaws will be amended.
Or that the bylaws have been amended?
Either way, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I didn't have much to add. I wanted to echo what Councilmember Way said about, and our city manager about, just, it's a little bit like our Measure A and Measure G, there was a certain element of trust because, operations and past performance had been, responsive and competent. And, that's, without really having gone into the details myself, that's sort of the level, but I appreciate the caution as well. So.
All right, so Councilmember Andre, I agree with you. I will follow your lead. So if you would like to make a motion to pass this conditional upon the change in the bylaws being made, I would be happy to second that. If you would like to follow Councilmember Way's lead and say, let's trust him, I would do that as well. So what are you comfortable with?
But if we pass it conditionally, will this move forward? I don't want to unduly hold anything up. So if we pass it conditionally, what are the
Well,
ramifications?
the changes don't occur till every member agency signs off on
Mhm.
them. So if you do a conditional approval, you're holding your signature until the conditions met,
Okay,
essentially. But conditional approval means you don't need it to come back here. You don't need it on another council agenda. If they meet the condition, you're authorizing the mayor to sign off.
okay.
But Vice Mayor Way, do you see that as a problem that we're going to be holding something up by not signing this until the bylaws are amended?
Well, at the last meeting, the only member agency that expressed any concern was Fairfax, and everyone else was in the language was acceptable to all the other agencies in the room. So I think this conditioning may put this on the agenda for MWPA in September or October. I just don't know if it's going to make it difficult timing wise for some of the other agencies.
I think that probably will be okay from what I
Okay.
understand. And just so you know about Fairfax's concern, they're concerned about a different section that's discussed in staff report. They have some questions around change to require more indemnification by the member agencies. I don't have that concern because the way this agency operates, they send money to the member agencies and the member agencies do the work. And so what MWPA is saying is we don't control your work, so we shouldn't be legally responsible for errors you make doing work just because we gave you money to do the work. And so they changed the JPA for that. And I think Fairfax wants a little more clarity on the thinking behind that.
Yeah, that's correct. Thanks for clarifying that. They didn't express any concern about the language we're talking about tonight. I would be more comfortable passing it with an addendum memo outlining our requests that Councilmember Andre said about changing the bylaws, and that was outlined by the manager. I would be comfortable with that. I think we need to move forward, else we might hold up this whole process for all the other agencies which are on board.
Okay, point taken. I appreciate that, and I'll defer to, our city manager and also our representative on the MWPA, Councilmember Way, to represent our views. So thank you. So I'll move to pass this agenda item 4.8 as it is written. And we'll rely on the city manager or are we going to put an addendum? Should we pass it with the addendum?
I think you should add to your motion
Uh-huh.
that you would like to request that the bylaws be amended
Okay.
and that tax measures require an advisory vote from every member agency.
Okay, so I'll move to pass agenda item 4.8 with the proviso that the bylaws of the MWPA be amended to seek an advisory vote before any taxes are put forward to the taxpayers.
And I think we're one of the first of the cities to take this. I think a few of the districts have, so I'll make sure that letter gets drafted quickly and gets out to all the cities so they have it, and hopefully they'll join the request.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay, can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Andre,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way,
Yes.
Mayor Kendall.
Yes.
Okay, then we move on to next item is city managers oral report. Mr. City Manager, what do you got for us today?
Just calendaring today, Mr. Mayor. This is your only meeting scheduled for August, so I make the public aware we'll be dark for the what would be our regular second meeting in 2 weeks from now. And then coming out of summer vacation, we're going to be rather busy. So folks need to start paying attention to the website. I want to just highlight a few things that are coming. We are tracking now that you will hear about the general plan update and the housing element at your September 4 meeting. And then the September 18 meeting, we anticipate a joint meeting with the Heritage Board. And at that meeting, you'll receive updates from the Heritage Board about what they're working on, some of the projects they've been doing. But also, we've been able to schedule the consultants who are researching the conditions in this building. And they're going to provide their very first impressions. Just so folks know, this isn't a decision-making item. It is, what did they discover? I can attest that a large group of folks with Mr. Julian Skinner marched all around the building and poked the building quite a bit. So they've been doing their research on what exactly do we have. And I think that's what they'll mostly talk to you about. And they'll talk about what they'll be doing with that information going forward. And so that'll be part of your September 18 meeting. And I think probably you'll start to hear more and more about the upcoming new library project because we are on track for that project to go to the Planning Commission sometime in September and be followed up with some presentations to the council probably in October. So I encourage folks to really pay attention to our notices, our calendar on our website.
All right, and I have a question for our city attorney. If members of council wanted to go to the planning commission meeting, the aforementioned planning commission meeting, is that a Brown Act violation? Can we do that? How does that play out?
It is not a Brown Act violation as long as you do not sit together and do not discuss anything about the subject matter while you're there. I mean, as a precaution, we might agendize it as a special council meeting, but with no council participation, just to be safe in case a quorum does show up. Because of course, it's only a meeting of the council if a quorum is there. But otherwise, it's not a problem. Although I will say that I would also caution you not to make comments during the discussion. There's some case law sort of suggesting that that council members participating in an agenda item where they basically have oversight over the lower body can assert undue influence on the lower body and in effect give members of council sort of two bites at the apple, for lack of a better phrase.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Other comments or questions from any council members? Vice Mayor Way.
I just wanted to make sure that we also mention that for the community to pay attention to the location where some of these meetings, upcoming meetings may be held, because I understand that some of them may be offsite, maybe at the conference center over in Redwood High School. So just pay attention to that. So at the last minute, you're not in the wrong location.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, council members? Okay, let's move on to item 6, which is council member reports. Any council members like to give a report?
Very quickly, the Chamber of Commerce is hosting their 12th annual wine stroll. That's on September 7th. I think they've sold over like 300 tickets already. They have over 24 wineries and a dozen food retailers who will be there. I think it'll be really fun. Oh, and there's going to be a live band. I think it'll be really fun. And tickets are on sale at the Chamber of Commerce's website. Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll go quickly. So just to report out, I'm trying to keep us regularly posted on the transportation agency. So starting with TAM, Transportation Authority of Marin. The last meeting at the end of July was finalizing the draft for the vision plan. So this happens every 25 years. And the last one was written in 2003. And you can imagine transportation has changed considerably in Marin. And just I would like to encourage the public and council members to look at the draft plan because it won't be finalized and adopted until later, end of this year. And the big issues, were, the four things they really do is maintain the roads, deal with congestion, safe routes to school, and Marin Transit. Those are the four things that roughly, I think it's an $80 million a year budget does. And so there seemed to be a quorum on, continuing to have strong focus on safe routes to school. The roads, there's a program called Fix It First, and it seemed to be very appealing, but more and more council members said, of the 16 members said that that's really something that cities do. So they push that priority down. And then one that I really tried to push a lot and got some good support is on having more data and analysis for the agency in general. I feel they make a lot of decisions, and the data to me is critical in having a really informed board and making sure these plans are correct. So I hope that they will increase the traffic demand model that they have, and understand future proofing and what RENA will do to transportation, and really measure twice, cut once for these very expensive capital projects. Only other thing is SMART. They're doing really well. And so they set another record in July, over 80,000 riders, and that's 34% higher than July of 2023. And now they're looking at maybe breaking 90,000. That means 3,000 people riding SMART every day in August. And that's largely because of the 4 Giants games and back to school. So, it's an agency, I'll say openly, I was had mixed feelings about joining, and versus MWPA, on which Councilmember Way sits. I thought that's a really successful one, but I believe SMART has been turning a corner, heavily promoting and getting a lot of ridership. So any concerns there? And the Larkspur shuttle that they instituted too, any feedback from the community, I'd love to hear if that's working for people, trying to get people from the train to the ferry and around town as well. So that's it for me.
Okay, Vice Mayor Way.
Sure. Last Wednesday, Councilmember Paulson and I attended a presentation at the new town hall at Corte Madera, where Senator Mike McGuire attended. He is our senator representing from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border and us in Marin County. He's also the lead senator, I guess that's Senator Pro Tem in the California Senate, which was terrific to have him present to us. There was about 50 community members attended. And I was just pleased that we were there to show that the collaboration we have with Corte Madera and their council members and many of our first responders who attended is an important part of how we create this community. So he was very good at presenting what the status of the state is and the budget, and also answering questions about how he can help better represent us. And we were able to give him a few suggestions. So we'll look forward to continuing our work with Senator McGuire.
Excellent, thank you. And on my list, just to keep the public up to date, the subcommittee for Serenity and the taxes is progressing. Nothing to report, but we just like the public to know that we are regularly moving forward, going to meetings, and should have something to report out shortly. The progress on the library is going well. We have had a couple of meetings on that. The last one was just a couple hours ago. Everything looks beautiful moving forward. I think the plan is to break ground beginning of 2025, and there will be updates and chances for the public to comment on that. I met with people from the other TAM, which is the Transportation Authority of Marin, which was talking about bike routes and having a bike path closer to the creek. I've been talking to staff about that, and we will give an update on that at a future meeting. Nothing really to report on that other than that it's under discussion. And then finally, I just wanted to say that I've been getting a lot of calls and having a lot of meetings about the rent ordinance, the rent stabilization ordinance, which is on the ballot for November. I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk to me about it. either side. I'm happy to learn other people's perspectives, so please feel free to contact me. Happy to go get a cup of coffee and to hear your perspective and share mine. And that's it for that. So that ends council members' reports. Public hearings, we have none. Moving on to business items. We got a couple of business items tonight. The first one, item 8.1, City of Larkspur Community Facilities District CFD number 2024-1, Larkspur Lagoon Bulkhead Replacement Project. Can we get a staff report on this one, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to give the staff report, and then I want to acknowledge that Mark Pressman from Wolf Hansen, who's the city's municipal advisor, is present and can speak to the financial aspects of this staff report, should you have specific questions there. And then Sky Woodruff, your city attorney, worked closely with bond counsel for this and is prepared to speak to any of the legalities that you may have questions about. So for folks to orient themselves, the Larkspur Marina neighborhood is the neighborhood immediately north of Redwood High School in Larkspur. And if you haven't ever been there, it's sort of two rings of housing. One is called, the residents tend to call the outer ring, and one they tend to call the inner ring. The outer ring are the houses whose backyards have docks and are out on the creek itself. And the inner ring have backyards that are on the lagoon that's in the middle of the neighborhood. The way the neighborhood was constructed and the way responsibilities were apportioned, the folks who have lagoon facing backyards have a private ownership and responsibility for what's called a bulkhead or a retaining wall that helps keep the lagoon in place and not encroaching onto their properties. That creates a bit of a collective action challenge, right? Because you have 98 owners of what really needs to be a uniform infrastructure project. And so we were approached by the neighborhood, your staff, to have a discussion about the fact that for many of the owners, the bulkhead is in a deteriorating condition and they have concerns about the long-term stability and they want to repair it. This is not a small project. And while some members of the neighborhood might be readily able to take on the financial challenge of fixing their wall, others may not, which could result in either parts of it not being fixed or parts of it not being fixed to the same quality as another person does theirs. Ideally, you want a uniform construction project so that you have a long-term viable infrastructure. So in having that discussion and recognizing that even though this is a private interest, there is a public interest in helping a neighborhood and 98 homes maintain a particular infrastructure setup like this. And also recognizing that this is a substantial project. This is not a small one. This is a 7 or 8 figure project to fix all of these bulkheads to the right quality. We started discussing how some sort of public participation to help the neighborhood could make it work. And essentially what the neighborhood proposed is they felt that if there could be some mechanism to do some sort of assessment on all the properties that would be used to get a bond issued and then use that bond to make the repairs and then pay that bond over 20 years. That would be something that would bring some equity among all the owners, that they could all handle that financial commitment. One of the ways that a public agency like the city can help facilitate that sort of infrastructure investment is to form a separate legal entity called a community facilities district. Community facilities districts, sometimes called Melrose districts, particularly if you have ever owned property in Southern California, are districts that were specifically designed to charge property for infrastructure investment that benefits them. A lot of those projects are public projects, but it's not unheard of to do a public-private partnership where the CFD is going to invest in a private partnership and a private infrastructure such as this one. So once we identified that there was the potential for the city to help the neighborhood to set up this legal structure and make this investment, our next goal was to make sure that if we did this, we didn't create any sort of risk or liability for the city. Because ultimately this risk and liability belongs to the property owners, and we're just trying to help them with the financial mechanism to make this all work. And so we worked with council, with municipal advisor, with the neighborhood to come up with a proposal for community facilities district that would essentially serve as a taxing entity to do this assessment. And then that assessment would essentially be used to fund the work that would be done, engineering and construction. But the CFD and ultimately the property owners would essentially indemnify the city. Also, when you build a CFD, you make sure that the costs of government are going to be covered. So we want to make sure that all planning occurs so that there's no financial impact, that the taxpayers of Larkspur are not subsidizing this particular operation. So that's been built into the financial model to protect the city. So essentially, we've eliminated risk for the city should we decide to go forward with this. Legally, what's occurring tonight is you as a council have to decide if you want to form this community facilities district on behalf of this neighborhood, essentially. For a lot of folks, it's going to be a little confusing because a CFD, the board is typically the body that agreed to sponsor or create the agency. So the council would ultimately sit as the CFD board. And it's fairly common for that to be parked on an agenda for the city council, and you temporarily stop being the city council and you temporarily start being the CFD. So operationally, from a government standpoint, it's going to look like you're in charge, but for the most part, you're only going to be there to facilitate this financial transaction aspect of things taking place. This doesn't just happen though because you want it to happen. Your goal here tonight is to decide if you're comfortable with the idea of creating this vehicle that will allow this neighborhood to move forward, but it's still any sort of assessment and the formation of the district itself is subject to a vote of the affected property owners. So you're essentially starting the process and then handing it over to the 98 homeowners so that they can decide if this is something they want to have happen. If they were to decide in a vote that it's not supposed to happen, then, or that they're not supportive of it, then it won't happen and your action will essentially be rendered moot. So, so you should bear that in mind. You are not imposing today any sort of assessment or tax on this neighborhood. You're essentially putting in motion a ballot measure for them. It would be a mail-only ballot to the property owners that would probably occur. I think we've marked the calendar, it occurs sometime in the early 2025. So that's the process you're discussing this evening. That's the project you're considering facilitating. And the couple of questions that have been asked of me, in addition to just mitigating risk and liability, this is a separate legal entity. So its debt is not the city's debt. The effect of that debt doesn't hit the city in any way, including creating problems with our own capacity to issue debt from the city. This debt would be secured by the property owners by an affirmative vote that they've agreed to assess themselves. That's what secures the debt. So you are not in any way putting any city asset forward as part of this arrangement. So you can feel comfortable that this really is something that the neighborhood is taking on. And at the end of the day, I think it's the conclusion of all of the staff that this improvement needs to occur. And this really is not just the best, but probably the only really feasible way to do this over a 20-year financing period. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Pressman if he has any comments ahead of as part of staff presentation, and then we'll take questions from council.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Just to give you a little sense of hopefully comfort, we formed a CFD for the outer waterway parcels about 20 years ago, and put together a program where they were able to do a major dredging so that they could not be in the mud with their boats and so forth. They did a dredging, and then we had a cash flow. The taxes accumulated, so they were able to, after the first dredging, they were able to do a minor dredging after 5 years, and then another major dredging. So they didn't have to do more debt. So they were able to do it on a cash flow basis, a pay-go basis. Also, the Central Marine Police station, that was funded with a CFD also, but that was city of Larkspur and town of Corte Madera combined. That was two cities' votes, and so that was a big one. But that facility was also funded with a CFD, so it's not the first time you've ever been to this rodeo. And as Dan says, the city has been absolved of any financial responsibilities. The city will contribute staff time to oversee the construction and so forth. But that staff time will be reimbursed by the CFD. So this improvement is really critical to the viability of those parcels, because some of them are sliding into the water because the bulkhead has failed. And the bulkhead has varying degrees of deterioration. It's over 50 years old and well beyond its life expectancy. So this improvement is really needed, and the Property Owners Association has gone ahead and has funded the engineering and the studies and all that sort of stuff, which are well underway. So the Property Owners Association is committed to this project. We've had numerous informational meetings with property owners, and the reception, we explored all kinds of different financing approaches, and the CFD is really the best way to tackle it. Has been the decision of the Property Owners Association. And so the property owner presentations have all been well received by the audience of property owners. And so tonight, you are just being asked to initiate the process. We will be coming back to you on September 18 for a public hearing. And that at that point in time, you'll do more committed type situation. And due to time constraints and various other restrictions and procedural, we need to have the public hearing in September, and then the election will be held on March 5th of 2025. With Allison and the Department of Elections at the county. We've coordinated that, and everybody's on board. So it's all pretty well set up now, lined up. And we were trying to get ready for the November election, but we just didn't have enough time because of the required timelines for this CFD formation. We didn't have time to do that. And ultimately, that's probably a better thing to avoid that election in any case. So we're going to be pushing it off to March. The engineering is expected to be completed closer to early part, first or second quarter of 2025, at which time we'll be able to have the election, and subsequent that, if we have a successful election, which requires 2/3 positive vote. If we're successful with the election, the bonds would be issued probably within a month or two after March. And the money will be there when the engineering is completed. So it should be ready to move forward during the summer, hopefully the summer of 2025. And it could take anywhere, depending on the permitting and the you've got, you got to worry about waterfowl and all of the other kinds of permits and stuff. Depending on that permitting, it could be done, the project could be done within 3 to 12 months, someplace in there is the expectation. We've also designed the financing so that we will capitalize interest, so the property owners will not pay anything on the property tax bill for this until the 25-26 tax roll. So their first payment would be December of 26, even though the bonds will have been issued in 2025. And we are also being conservative. We are overfunding the bond or the construction project with the idea that, you know, a lot of this construction is underwater. It's yet unknown. And so it's kind of like remodeling. You don't know what you get until you open the wall up, and then you may have a surprise. We don't want to have to do 2 bond issues. So we're doing one that's larger than expected. And if the money's there needed, it'll be there. If it's not needed, we're structuring the bond issue and the resolutions that you have such that we'll be able to reduce the size of the loan by using the excess money to call bonds early. And so it'll reduce, we will basically reduce the loan to what is the actual construction cost was, plus the incidental expenses. So we've tried to think it out thoroughly, and the program has been, as I say, well received by the property owners at those informational meetings. And so we were asking you to initiate the process tonight. And we will come back to see you at the public hearing on September 18th, should you decide to go ahead tonight.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let me put it to council right now. Questions for staff that anyone has? Vice Mayor Way.
That was very thorough. Thank you. Nice to see you again after our 2020 refinancing was the last time I think we had a conversation. You actually answered a lot of my questions by your thing, but I'd like to ask about the ballot measure. That ballot measure, would that goes to the entire electorate of Larkspur, not just to the residents of that neighborhood, correct?
No,
No,
Oh,
this is for property
the
owners.
election will go to only the 98 property
Okay.
owners.
great. And they need 2/3 of them to vote in favor of it.
2/3 of those that vote.
That the property owners.
Yes, you have 98 property owners. If 50 of them vote and the other 48 do not, you need 2/3 of the 50 that vote.
Great. Okay.
Sorry, just to chime in, Mark, because there are more than 12 registered voters within the boundaries of the CFD, it's actually a voter election, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's just because there may be some registered voters within the boundaries of the CFD who are not property owners.
That's true. It is the residents that live in the agency or in the district. It's not the owners, it's the residents that are registered voters
Okay, so
in the district.
right.
They're the ones that vote, whether
Yeah.
they own or rent. That if they're registered at that address, then they vote.
Okay.
if they're registered to vote within the boundaries of the CFD, then they will receive a ballot that allows them to vote on this matter.
Correct.
So that would include not only the Lagoon residents, the 98 Lagoon residents, but the ones who are on the waterway also, or just the 98?
Only the 98. Only the 98 have the ability to, or the opportunity to vote. And the 98 are the only ones that will be taxed for this, should it go forward.
Okay. And if someone, one of the 90, if a member of if a household defaults, and disagrees to pay it later, what's the remedy for that?
It would be, the tax levy will be collected on the general property tax roll that's issued by the county. And we will have the same foreclosure or remedy procedure as normal property taxes, which is generally you have a 5-year grace period. It's expensive, there's a 10% penalty and then 1.5% per month after that. But the county will not initiate foreclosure proceedings for 5 years after the initial default.
Okay, and last question is, I know we have our public works would have oversight, but and engineering review, but what if there's damage to the road surfaces or something on the on the on the construction project, and there is additional damage that needs to be repaired? Is that covered in this bond, or is it only the lagoon bulkhead repair that's covered?
So those are two separate things. Let's start with the first comment. So the Public Works involvement will be limited to oversight and insurance that the engineering firm that the Property Owners Association has already selected to work with them complies with all public project code that's going to be involved
Okay.
here. So we're not doing
Okay.
any engineering ourselves for this project. And then the second thing is the project will require permits, and all of those permits will have conditions that any damages caused by the project have to be remedied. So to answer your second question about tearing up the roads, that would be a requirement to remedy if you did damage to a road while doing the project.
Thanks.
Also, Mark, if I could ask you to clarify something or add something to your answer to Councilmember Way's previous question. I assume that the tax rates are going to be set at an amount that will develop a reserve so that if there are defaults by property owners, there will still be adequate funding to make bond payments.
If for example, if the levy is $1, the maximum levy will be $1.10. So, excuse me, if the debt service is $1, there will be the ability to levy up to $1.10. And that is for the purpose of taking care of delinquencies or just unforeseen things. And on top of that, there would be an opportunity or an additional levy for, which is minor, for administration, so that the city can farm that or subcontract that administration of the CFD to a specialist that does that. That's anticipated to be $12,000 to $15,000 a year. They take all the property owners and put together the tax roll and submit it to the county, and keep track of who owns the property and all that sort of thing. The levy itself will be based on front footage. So in other words, a property that has 70 front feet of the lagoon will pay 61 hundredths of the cost, whereas somebody that has 140 front feet will pay twice that much. So it's based on frontage and the actual bulkhead that fronts their property.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Way, any other questions that you have? Other
No, thanks.
council members have questions or comments?
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. Thanks for the presentation. And I want to add, I've been, trying to watch this issue, and I do feel, the city has a role to, to be supportive here. So the three responsibilities, I guess, were essentially facilitating the creation of this ballot measure is one, and then the staff, which sounds like permits, inspections, not much different than what goes out in the housing department. And then the last one was sitting on the board. Maybe you could clarify a little bit. Is what are the responsibilities? Are the council voting members on a board, or did I just misunderstand that?
There will be an annual budget that will need to be put together, and that will be done by the administrators, the subcontractors for that, given to staff. And then once a year, the board or the council would meet as the board of the CFD and approve that budget. And that basically to pay to do the levy which enables the city to be able to pay the debt service on the bonds and any other administrative costs.
So, loosely put, like a citizen's oversight. So we're really independent of the HOA, of the inner outer ring, Riviera Circle constituents, and just as a sort of fiduciary responsibility that the money is being spent appropriately as the bond measure would be languaged. So.
And you should be provided by either the administrators or ourselves or staff with all the information you need to be able to make informed, careful decisions.
So that implies that, there's that ability to, if we think that the construction, because I did notice there's an appraisal piece to this as well. And you might want to explain that a little bit more.
Say that again?
The appraisal piece, the lien ratio. So if we thought that the finances were off, then would that possibly stop the project? I mean, would that be part of a responsibility if we think it's got a lot of cost
Well,
overruns?
that's at the outset, and based on, you can either do an appraisal, and that's typically done on a CFD where you have raw land
Mhm.
and no improvements. But here we have fully improved properties, so we will be using the assessed value.
Hmm.
And the assessed value on an aggregate is 7 times coverage. The requirement is 3 times. So we easily exceed that requirement. And that's only a requirement at the initial formation. It's not a requirement later on. And based on assessed values, what's your bet 5 years from now? Is the assessed value going to be lower or higher? So I think we're pretty safe.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Andre, any comments, questions?
Just a few questions. Thank you for your time. So the term of this bond, are we talking 5 years or 20 years? I didn't,
The length of the bond?
yes, the term to maturity.
The resolutions authorize up to 35 years.
Okay,
We will be going probably at least 30 years, potentially out to 35. And the logic for that is that the improvement is based on the materials and input from the engineers. The materials are expected to have a life expectancy in excess of that, closer to 50 years. In the last 50 years, the materials and all that sort of stuff has really improved as far as the science on what to use in saltwater. And under these sort of circumstances, they've had samples of the bulkhead at these information meetings so people could see what it looks like and lift it and stuff. But the logic of a longer amortization period, number one, it reduces the levy. If you have a 10-year
Yeah.
loan on a mortgage, your payments are going to be higher if you could pay off the same amount than it would be your payments, a longer period of time, your payments are going to be lower. These are pretty large levies, responsibilities of each property owner. And so we want to make the carry cost or the payment as low as possible. And so we're going to be lengthening the payoff, probably toward between 30 and 35 years. Number two, we want to be able to spread the cost. There are going to be residents there now, but the bulkhead is going to be benefiting those properties 20, 30 years from now. So the cost of that improvement should be shared by those future property owners as well, not all borne by the current property owners. So that's again part of the theory of why we want to stretch the loan out longer.
great. Thank you. And then, so in the table that you show, or that was included in the materials where it was the maximum levy per parcel. I mean, some of these numbers are like 40,000 per parcel. Is that per year or is that over the life of the bond?
Unfortunately, it's annual,
It's an annual number.
right?
Okay. So any research into, how that number compares versus the property taxes that are already on the property to see whether there might be some distress, ability to pay type of analysis, because some of these numbers are rather large.
I agree
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want it on my property.
I mean, had the homeowners seen these numbers? Is that,
They have seen it.
they have seen them? Okay,
But they don't have an alternative. And this is
Okay.
we're going to be using municipal financing that we will be selling these to the public and selling the bonds to the public. In that it's private property that is benefiting from this. We do not get the benefit of tax exempt tax rate or interest rates. We have to pay taxable rates. We've used a 6% as the estimated modeling number. If it were to be done with tax exempt rates, it might be closer to 4.5 or something like that.
Okay.
But again, we've tried very hard to get the costs down as much as we can. Of course, we're highly cognizant of the fact that this is a heavy load for everybody. And part of the problem is that some of the properties have not traded, they've not sold for decades. And so their assessed value is quite low. And so it's hard to kind of, so there, as a function of them having not sold for a long time, their general property taxes are artificially low because of Prop 13. So this tax may be highly, a big portion of their total property tax when the time comes, when it's included. But again, this is something that, if they were to try to finance this any other way, with a private bank loan or through the property owners association, which all have been explored, they wouldn't get this long of a loan, number one. Number two, the interest rate would be probably closer to 10% as opposed to where we are. I think we'll be 6% or maybe a little bit lower. The property owners are against a wall, and they need to do this to save their property. And so this is the best, most efficient, most effective means of financing it.
Great, understood. Thank you. I guess my one recommendation, maybe Sky can answer this. I mean, you brought up earlier that the property owner may not necessarily reside there, but the person who votes could potentially be a renter. I mean, have we tried to reach out to the actual property owner to make sure that all property owners are aware that this is coming and that they're in agreement?
So just want to clarify that I think everybody understands, but I do want to make certain it's a registered voter election. The boundaries of the CFD have been drawn to include only those properties that will be subject to the tax. So basically only the ones that have a bulkhead that's to be repaired. And then anybody who is registered to vote at any of the addresses within that district will be eligible to vote on this measure. I believe that there's been outreach because the outreach has been through the Property Owners Association. So basically the communication here is, as Mark and team have been talking to the Property Owners Association representatives, and that they have been delivering information to all of the members of the association about this. So I believe all of the property owners understand, even if they do not, at least they've received information, even if they do not reside within the property.
Okay.
That's our understanding.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You want to talk? You want to talk? We have Louis Tenenbaum, who's the president of the Property Owners Association. He might be able to chime in a little bit as far as the outreach effort.
Okay,
Is that all right?
of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan and Sky. I just want to reassure you that this effort that needs to be made to inform every property owner has been made, as well as any community can do it. I've walked the streets, we've walked the streets, we've handed out flyers, we've established a website, we've had community meetings at Redwood High School on multiple occasions with engineers, with the finance people, with our legal people. We've informed them. I believe Councilman Paulson was at one of these meetings. Some of the meetings were very exuberant, divisive. Ultimately, we did have a vote that allowed the Property Owners Association to take control of the management of the bulkhead while still having the individual owner retain ownership. But that allowed us to move forward to develop a situation where one design would be implemented for 100% of people. And that was, people were giving things up, but they did it. The vote on that occasion, while not unanimous, was overwhelmingly positive. We've reached out. We've been doing this for over 5 years, it's consumed us. And the white elephant in this room that I can see very well is called $20 million. That's what the bond issue will be for. And not everybody can afford that on an annual basis. But the way Mark Pressman has helped us is to extend it over time and to allow the debt not to be attached to the individual, but to the property, so that if someone moves in 2 or 3 years, if they're encouraged to move because of the cost, they don't leave behind the debt that they have to deal with. So while the number is huge, it's so equitable for all of us, people like myself who live in a house that's paid for with my wife. My kids are out of college. Others are 40 years younger than me, and their kids are just starting school. So this debt impacts all of us. We don't have any options at this point. We've had homes slipping, and when they do slip, we're afraid the houses on either side of them will slip. Last year, we had our fingers crossed at the start of winter. Well, guess what? There's another winter coming up. We hope that the Community Facilities District is established, that you'll support us on this. We're coming into this with eyes wide open, all of us, but we need this. We can't afford to do it individually. Our community is pulling together, and we need your help.
Thank you for that. Do you have other comments, questions? All right, I just have one question for our city attorney. I obviously want to help, and I think it would be great if we could help. Liability. Okay, we're taking on a board role. Is there D&O insurance? Do we have any board liability? Does the city have liability if things go wrong? How could this possibly backfire?
Okay, well, let me try to lay out what I see as multiple levels of protection for the city and for you as the individual members of the council who'll be sitting as the board. The Community Facilities District is a government entity. It exists only for financing purposes, but you don't lose your immunities as members of a legislative body when you're sitting as the board of the CFD. So all of your immunities and protections that you enjoy as a member of the city council still exist when you sit as the CFD board, and also any since it's also a component of the city's standard insurance backs any liabilities that might incur, and the cost of defense would be covered by the city's insurance. So then additionally, the CFD's role is limited. It is going to form the district. Assuming affirmative votes on everything, the CFD is going to form the district, going to submit the measure to the voters of the district. If they approve it, the CFD will levy the tax, impose a lien on each property, and then, as Mark said, annually adopt the budget and levy the tax. Tax gets collected by the county as part of regular property tax. If the whole thing is modeled so that if there are delinquencies or defaults, the revenue from the tax is actually sufficient to continue to make bond payments. So there should be no default on the bonds, even if there are delinquencies from the property owners. And ultimately, the bondholders' recourse is to foreclose on the properties, not to pursue remedies from the CFD other than assistance with foreclosures. Additionally, there will be an agreement between the city/CFD and the Property Owners Association, in which the Property Owners Association will agree to indemnify and defend the city and the CFD. We've agreed to use the same wording that we used or thereabouts when, if you recall, the city entered into a reimbursement agreement with the Property Owners Association to address the gates that allow the water to flow in and out of the lagoon. Everybody ultimately felt that that was an equitable allocation of risk that protected the city. And so they've agreed to use similar terms in that agreement. So at the end of the day, there are multiple levels of protection. The CFD's role is limited. The financial risk is largely covered. It's not, doesn't not exist, but the system should be set up so that the risks are covered by recourse to the property, not to the city. If there is any attempt to draw the city into litigation, then including like, as the CFD, then as a component of the city's insurance should cover that. Your individual situations should be covered by the typical government immunities for legislative body.
So what I'm hearing is that you, as our attorney, are telling us the risks are virtually all covered, both for the taxpayer and for the board, and you feel comfortable recommending this?
I feel comfortable recommending it. It's a model that has been used multiple times around the state. It's as Mark mentioned, it's a model that exists already to fund the CMPA police station. Basically, it's a much larger group of properties, excuse me, that are paying it. So the risks of default are much lower, but it's the same model. And so for the most part, these function without a great deal of problem. Where I have seen issues is in new subdivision development where the units are not sold as quickly as possible. And so there isn't adequate tax revenue being generated to fund the bonds that were issued to pay for the improvements. And there are very difficult issues with the foreclosures on the properties, difficulties between the bondholders and the city that formed the CFD. This is not that kind of a situation. I certainly can't say that there's no risk, but I feel like we've done you have a strong group of professionals who've been through this many times, who've tried to think this through and model this in a way that's going to minimize the risk for the city.
Okay. All right. With that answer, I feel comfortable. Can we make a motion for all three resolutions at once?
Oh, there may be other members of the public. who wish to
Okay,
address.
so let me open this up to the public. Are there anyone in the public that has would like to comment on this issue? Come on up.
James Holmes, Larkspur. Boy, I'm glad I don't live on that internet. But just a couple of questions. Number one, is this process, well, when the outer ring CFD was established, was that same process, is that same process that we're being used here? In other words, do we have a very clear precedent for it? Are there any significant differences? I mean, if the answer to that is yes, are there any significant differences between the city's role and liability in the outer ring process 20 years ago versus the inner ring? And I guess my last question would be, do we know if the city's insurer has any concerns with that? Thank you.
Excellent questions. I'll turn them over to staff if staff would like to comment on those.
I'm going to be a little indelicate.
Okay.
The Larkspur Marina Financing Authority is slightly different than a CFD in actuality. If we were bringing that to you, I would not be recommending it. It was the right vehicle when it was formed. It is, I don't even know if you can legally form that entity the way they did way back when. Today, this entity, this structure is very common. It's used all throughout the state. If I were starting over with the outer ring, I would be recommending this structure, not what's in place. But I want everybody who lives on an outer ring, how I'm to know it's working just fine. We've got it dialed in, but I don't want to take you into the weeds for an hour explaining the various minutiae and differences. I do feel the fundamental principle is the same precedent, that the city agreed to help property owners with an infrastructure need that helps them protect their property and enjoy their property. So that was the answer to the primary question there. So I also want to remind the council and the public that we don't have an insurer. We are a city that participates, as do most cities, in risk pooling. And with risk pooling, we partner with other cities to collaborate and share our risk. And the primary way we do that is by placing funds together that we use to cover our issues. We do buy certain policies. So you asked about D&O. In government, it's E&O, errors and omissions. And yes, you do have an insurance policy for that specific need that we buy through the risk pool. It happens that I'm the president of the risk pool, and I did happen to talk to the executive director. She's aware of this, but all of the risk pool members have finance vehicles like this. This is very common. So I'm very confident that we're kosher there.
It won't affect our coverage or, contribution or anything like that.
No, because I've assured them and they've understand that we're transferring all the risk away from the city.
Perfect. Thank you. Other members from the public have comments they'd like to make on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment. Any council members like to have any questions or comments on this item?
I'd be ready to move this if no other council member has comments.
Okay, question for our, city attorney. Can we make one motion for all three of these resolutions?
It's just doing 3 separate.
Okay. Councilmember Paulson, would you like to start with the first one?
Sure. So I move resolution 5524, adopting local goals and policies relating to the community facilities district.
Can I get a second?
I'll second it.
Can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Andre,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way,
Yes.
Mayor Candell.
Yes. Councilmember Paulson, can we get a second motion?
I move to to pass resolution 5624, resolution of intention to establish community facilities district number 2024-1, the Larkspur Lagoon Bulkhead Replacement Project.
Can I get a second?
And there's more to that, but you know which
It's-
one I'm talking about.
I think it's fine. City attorney, that's fine. That's fine. Let's get a roll call, please.
Councilmember Andre,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way,
Yes.
Mayor Candell.
Yes, and would anybody like to make a third motion? I'll go ahead, Councilmember. It's a general.
I'll sweep them up here. So I move to pass resolution 5724. That's the resolution of intention to incur bond indebtedness in the amount not to exceed $22 million within the CFD number 2024-1.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Andre,
Yes.
Councilmember Paulson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Way,
Yes.
Mayor Candell.
Yes, okay, all three measures passed. Thank you. Moving into business item 8.2, term limits for members of the city council. Can we get a staff report on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. From time to time, various members of the council, including most recently Mayor Candell, have spoken to me about what our options for term limits should we be interested as a council in having term limits for our members. We thought a lighter agenda in August was a good opportunity to bring this so you could have a brief conversation about this and provide any direction to staff if it's something you want us to work on further. So I want to acknowledge and thank Mr. Woodruff. He actually provided me with most of the detail that's in here. I just got to slap my name on top of it. But essentially what we've outlined for you is that there are processes in the government code where you could impose legal restrictions and essentially create term limits on your members, future members. And then the staff report outlines that if that's something that interests you, there are various policy questions to consider that different cities who've had these discussions have struggled with. And then secondly, we noted there is another option, which is the option that Mill Valley uses, which is they have a policy promoting on a symbolic level that the members honor a 2-term limit. It's not legally binding. And from time to time, you'll hear about a Mill Valley member who announces why they want to have a 3rd term. But I've observed over the years, as you probably have, that the symbolic approach makes the newspapers and gets some discussion. So it definitely has its own force. It just doesn't have the force of law that the other options would have.
All right, perfect. Let me just throw out there, I did ask our city manager to agendize this because I am a strong believer that in a representative form of government, that you should have turnover and people from the public having an opportunity to serve on the city council. So having said that, I am happy to open this up and see what members of the council think. Would anyone like to state their thoughts on this? Council, Vice Mayor Way.
As the only member here who's in her third term. Yeah, I've ruminated about this honestly since I first joined the council in 2013. Because Larkspur has a long tradition of people serving in this role for a very long period of time. And that has its pros and it has its cons. We've had members in the past who've served multiple terms, retired for a little while, and then come back and served again. So, and they provide valuable insight, but on the flip side, it keeps newer community members and others who may be interested in exploring a role from sometimes putting themselves forward, because incumbency is very hard to push back to win against. So I see both sides. But I think a prescriptive way in which we limit it could have damaging effects too. And the way that Mill Valley allows more of a policy statement encouraging a two-term relationship and then for the council member to move along is more comfortable for me to think through, because there are times that I've been on this council where we have had members who have extended to 3 terms because they have projects that are very important for them to complete. I remember Kathy Hartzell went to a 3rd term because she was the chair of the Centennial Committee, and it was really important to have that continuity. I remember Larry Chu stayed on for a 3rd term because we were facing a brand new turnover, and we needed to have someone with experience to stay on to help guide the transition. So there are times in which a 3rd or maybe even a 4th term would be beneficial to the residents and the businesses of Larkspur if an experienced person stayed on. But at the same time, an understanding as our council that we really want to encourage new members of the community to step forward and participate, and to honor those who have done it, and to accept that they need to step aside too. So the gist of that is that I think we can craft a council policy that recommends a 2-term limit, but understands that there are opportunities and there may be circumstances in which continuing for more terms may be needed. How's that sound?
It sounds wonderful. It's see other council members have opinions on this issue.
I kind of went for the 3rd term because I knew you needed help. No, I'm just
I appreciate
kidding.
that.
I'm just kidding. No, I really wanted to see the culmination of the library and community center, and we're going to see that. And so there was this special project I felt I had valuable input to give since I started working on it the first day in 2013 when I was first elected. So that's sort of an example of continuity that provides, I think, valuable insight to mentor other council members. But this is my last term, so I am adopting my own self-exiting position.
And Vice Mayor, let me say, I completely agree with you, you know, in the sense that there are times when it makes sense. I wasn't really concerned about a 3rd term. There have been people in the past that have been on the council for 25 years, you know, and I think that probably doesn't serve our community.
32.
32 years. So, but I would agree with that sentiment that there are occasions when it would make sense for continuity purposes to be on the council for longer than 2 terms. So I would be in favor of policy. But again, let me hear from the other council members and get their thoughts on this.
Okay. I largely agree with Councilmember Way and Mayor Kendall. I think that it's good to have fresh voices and perspectives, I think, on a board, and that's really valuable. I think the challenge is that our community, we're not a huge community. And so I think there's a limited number of people who want or can serve. I mean, a lot of us are working full time. I mean, it's, when you really think about it, it's really a very small pool of people who have the time to serve. And then you have to, find people who are willing to serve. And I've been, when I'm out talking to people, I will ask them, hey, we have a vacant seat, Kevin Carroll seat, would you be interested? And it's really difficult to find people who want to run. So I sort of balance that. Like, I think it's great. I agree that it's really valuable to have experience and have people who are experienced to help with transitions. But I also feel that it's also hard to just get new people to run. So, prior to this, I was going to suggest also a policy, or if we were going to institute strict term limits, I was going to recommend a 3-term maximum, and then say that if people wanted to roll off, for a term or two and then come back on and rerun, that would be another way to, handle that. And also, be able to give other people opportunities to run.
All right, and let me say, I completely agree with that as well, as far as I think this should be consecutive terms, because if you are on the council and you're off the council and you decide to run again, you're not running as an incumbent. So I'm just concerned that it's very difficult to run against an incumbent, and I want to encourage people to run. If you're on the city council, you're off, and then you come back and there's an open seat, I don't have a problem with that. So I agree with that sentiment. Councilmember Paulson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to echo, I think, most of what you said. The big trade-off is between experience and change and adaptability, fresh perspective. It's interesting just reflecting on the irony that, when we started, the average tenure was about 10 plus years. And now if we had a 5th person with 0 years, that's dropped to half that. So that kind of, made me think more about, you had mentioned Councilmember Way, Kathy Hartzell, and then Larry Chu was 16 years. And I think of Joan Lundstrom, and I just think of the benefit. Like looking, if history is a guide for the future, have we had anyone where the tenure has been problematic? And I think we've gotten enormous benefit and service from the depth of Larry, the depth of Joan and of Kathy and all the others. So that leads me to think that there isn't a problem to solve necessarily. But as a matter of principle, I think both you and I were lucky that space opened up. I mean, I really wanted to do this, but I didn't have the capacity to run a full campaign, especially against an incumbent. And so I really see that. I think the idea of symbolic is a good way to go. I think, consecutive, if that I would say, I'm pretty clear on that. If somebody has an eruption and comes back in 2 or 4 years, then they're not an incumbent, and the public really gets to vote on, them versus who's the incumbent now and the alternative. So I wouldn't preclude it. And that seems to be a very nice compromise between experience and allowing fresh blood. The only other thing I'd say, and I'm the most guilty of this at the moment, is part of the turnover is in the committee work. I know that, because of being mayor last year and we had a resignation, we had a death. And so, what's landed in my seat is TAM and SMART and MCE and all. And I feel, it was very hard for me to give up MWPA, but it's probably one of the best things. Councilmember Way is so qualified, and it's great to get her voice on MWPA, even though I felt like that was my baby. So one thing we may want to add to the discussion is that if people serve, there's more of a rotation of committees, because I know as mayor, it seemed like everybody wanted dibs on serving on Transportation Authority of Marin. And it was hard for me to, break with continuity. I think one council member had that for a long time. So it may be good, because the mayor normally decides this, but maybe we want to look at how that very important work, which takes our dais work and really extends it out to the county and the region, how that gets distributed and fresh ideas and blood happen there. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
I I agree with that as well. I love this council because I just think that we all think come up with good ideas independently and add to the conversation. So let me throw out there actually, let me open up to the public. Anyone in the public have any comments on this issue? Seeing none, let me bring it back to council and let me throw out a suggestion and get some feedback. It sounds like what we're talking about is a policy statement that would recommend a council member not serve more than 2 full consecutive terms. So if somebody comes on halfway through, that wouldn't count. And we can also put in there that is a policy statement that we rotate on committees, annually, so that we can get fresh perspectives and fresh voices on the different committees. Does that sound like a policy statement that people support or would like to make some changes? I see Vice Mayor Way's hand. What are your thoughts?
I think those are 2 separate things. I hear you, Gabe, about, I think we need to create 2 separate policies because assigning committee assignments is really an internal structure that we do, usually through the leadership of the mayor. But I agree that we probably need to formalize that a little bit better. But I kind of see that as a separate issue than what we're talking about with term limits. We can create 2 different policy statements, but the other one I think is a separate, they need to be bifurcated, in other words. I'm okay with Scott, with your idea of the 2 terms as a recommendation, but not as a commitment. It's an encouragement. So I'm okay with that. I think it falls similar to the Mill Valley language. I'd love to see the Mill Valley language a little bit clearer. I don't think that was in the staff report, but maybe we can explore that a little bit more. Because I remember Stephanie Moulton Peters stayed for 3 terms because she was working on the SMART train. And that was really important to continue to have her continuity there with that matter. So what do you think, Stephanie? You mentioned 3 terms. Do you think?
Well, I just mentioned 3 terms if we were going to institute a strict limit.
Oh, I don't want a strict limit.
Yeah. So I think if we go by way of policy and recommendation, I think two consecutive terms, 2 full consecutive terms makes sense to me.
I
If
mean,
that
I'm
works for you.
fine with 3 if people are more comfortable with that. I just think that there should be some turnover so that it encourages other members of the community to participate. That's all. If
Okay, then
people are more comfortable with 3, I'm fine with that as well.
I'm more comfortable with 3 then, if you're negotiable to that. And I'll tell you why. It's because I think the first term for many of us is a huge learning curve. It's really understanding how process, government, Larkspur, all of that works. And I think it takes a couple of years just to get into the flow of things. So I'm comfortable with 3 terms and encouraging no more than 3 terms.
Okay.
Can any feedback from
Yeah,
council? on
sure.
their
So
comfort with that?
I guess just I think the words that we're looking for is first of all, encourage or strict. And I'm leaning towards encourage right now. I'm not close to strict, but I would not want to do strict 2. And I'd say encourage 2 would be okay. And then the 3, I could go either way. And I agree, seeing the Mill Valley language and, ruminating a little bit more would help. And then to your point, Councilmember Wei, I do agree these are separate issues. I didn't mean to conflate them. And one thing, Mayor Kendall, I wouldn't say 1 year. The same, like the learning curve for MWPA for me, I think it was after my 2nd or 3rd year where I really became effective. And I'm trying, in my council member reports to give you guys TAM information, but I really believe within a year and a half or so, I'll be much more effective. But then at some point, I mean, the spirit of this is that not only is there fresh blood, but that things get done. And so if someone is just along for the ride, that's one thing. But if you come in with goals and objectives, I think the horizon may be more than 4 years, it may be 2 years. So for committee, it's the same. Maybe there's a way to, the symbolic seems to encourage a negotiation where you say, look, I'm on TAM because I don't think that agency's data driven enough. We're wasting a lot of money on like the 580 connector. I want to solve this. It's going to take me 4 years. And then the public can hear that, we can appreciate. And if I'm still hanging there on 6 years and nothing has changed, it's been, I mean, I think that, I don't know how that would be instituted, but to me, that would be the spirit of why we're doing this. We're here to serve. We have some goals. If we're not getting the job done, it's like a performance review and move on. And on top of that, I do think new people, it's really good for the city too.
All right, so I'm going to hold off on the committees for right now. And I'm just going to stick with the term limit issue. So it sounds like we are all on board that it should be a policy recommendation, however staff wants to word that, for consecutive terms. We are now between 2 and 3. Catherine is asking for 3. Is everybody comfortable? I mean, I initially thought 2 would be good, especially since we're just recommending it. So it would be the standard would be 2, the exception would be 3, as opposed to the standard being 3, the exception being 4. I probably feel a little bit more comfortable with that because it's a lot of time, but again, being flexible, you've heard 2 opinions. What are the other 2? What do you 2 think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that too, like the Mill Valley model. I think the Mill Valley model sounds like a good starting point. I'd say that if we can, bring this up again, I wasn't sure where we were going with this at all. So at this point, I feel like this is a constructive direction, and whether it's 2 symbolic or 3 symbolic, I think 2 would be okay.
Okay, would you like to pick 2 or 3? So I think Gabe said he's leaning towards 2. Do you have a way you are leaning?
Yeah, I mean, since it's going to be a recommendation, I think, either or, I'm open. I just think for me, it was just a maximum of 3 before someone rolled off. So if we're saying 2 and could be 3, that's perfect. That
All right,
works for me.
so why don't we, and it doesn't, if there were extenuating circumstances and it was 4, there's no rule against that. It's just kind of a recommendation so that we just have we're just announcing our intention. So Catherine, would you be comfortable with 2 as the recommendation? And then, if there's a reason to do more, you can do more, or whoever it is can do more, but it just
Sure.
kind of sets a standard.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, can we give direction to staff to come up with a resolution that is a policy statement similar to what we have just discussed?
Yes, I believe I sufficiently understand your conversation and can bring something back.
Okay, my next question is, it is not agendized to talk about the committees. Should we say
I
that for
heard
another
enough
day?
to understand you would like to talk about that at a future agenda item as well.
Perfect. Okay, do you need anything else on this business item, sir?
Nothing else on this item.
Okay, anybody else want to comment on this item before we move on? Okay, let's move on to 8.3.
Yes, so this is an item about the upcoming ballot measure concerning limiting rent increases for and evictions of tenants of some rental units. This is a citizens initiative ballot measure that is qualified, that you've now adopted, that it's qualified for the November ballot. You did that in June. During your conversations, there were some indications that some members of the council might feel strongly enough that they would want to participate in an argument against the measure. There's a deadline looming about that. So we wanted to bring you an item so you could have a discussion. To take a step back and explain process, when there is a ballot measure that's been deemed qualified and the council's taken the actions it took in June, there's effectively an announcement to the community that there's an opportunity to provide arguments for and against that measure. And the deadline is established by code, and in this case, it's August 19 of this year, to turn in an argument. If there are multiple members of the community or multiple groups in the community that want to provide arguments, they can do so. And the clerk will receive those multiple arguments And then the clerk goes through a process to determine, as the elections official, to determine which of those arguments will actually appear in the ballot book. There is an option essentially for the council to say, we want there to be a ballot argument and take an action that actually says we are assigning the responsibility for turning in a ballot argument to one of our members or two of our members. And in taking that action, telling the elections officer, this shall be the ballot argument. So even if another ballot argument were to be submitted, but one that you have authorized is the argument that would appear in the ballot book. So that's how you are considering changing the process tonight. That then, if you take this action, you're essentially assigning someone or two of your members that responsibility to make sure that that takes place. Separate and apart from all of this, then there's the question of who would sign that argument, and you all have the option to sign on to an argument. You have the option to not take an action tonight and choose as council members to sign on to an argument if you're aware that there's one in circulation that's likely to be submitted. So that's another path. You could just choose not to act tonight, but indicate that if there's you may choose to sign on to some other argument that's out there. The action tonight is also designed when arguments come in. If, for example, an argument is submitted in favor of a measure and an argument submitted against a measure, then the people who made those submissions receive the other position's argument, and they have an opportunity to file a rebuttal. Your action this evening would also authorize whichever council or council members you've assigned to have the option to ensure there's a rebuttal argument if an argument is submitted in favor. I don't know if the city attorney, if there's something needs to be covered. You prepped me well, as did Ms. Fallis, our elections officer. So that is what you're discussing this evening. If you want to take this action and essentially assign that responsibility of turning something in to one or more of your members.
Okay, thank you very much for that report. Let me open it up to council. Any council have an opinion that would like to start this discussion?
I just wanted to start with a question for clarification. I'm sorry if I missed it. So we don't know if any arguments have been submitted to date, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the only options are pro and con. I mean, so I was just looking back at the notes from our, what was it? It looks like the June 17th meeting where we received the report, and that report, will that be on the ballot as well? Or will that be referenced in the ballot, or how does
The
that?
report is not in the ballot book. It's you're talking about the 9212 report, the impact report.
Correct, yes.
Once there's a measure, what the elections official will do in conjunction with our staff is make sure that our website points to all information that we have that's available. So we'll make sure we will let the community know there is a measure. It's now been assigned this letter. Here's a link to information on the registrar's website about the measure. Here's a link to the agenda item where the council put it on the ballot, which is the agenda item that includes the impact report. So that's how the public would access it. Whether or not someone writing an argument for the ballot chose to make sure the public was aware of the impact report isn't my decision or anyone on staff's decision to make.
So there's no direct reference. There would be no direct
Not to
reference
the
to the
impact
ballot.
report.
Yeah, to the, okay.
Unless someone who writes an argument chooses to point to it.
Okay. And sorry if I didn't get this in the staff report. When's the deadline for us to decide whether to submit an argument or not?
Well, that's the thing. Those arguments need to be submitted by the 19th. So this is really this is your last meeting before that.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. And I should note, staff drew from your conversation that if there was a desire to submit an argument, it was an argument against. I could have misjudged, and you may be interested in an argument in favor. You could also be the San Anselmo Council, which, if you're not aware,
Doing both sides.
actually assigned some council members the responsibility of submitting an argument in favor and assigned other council members
Hmm.
the assignment of submitting the argument against. So that's an option too. No,
All right, other council member thoughts? I'm happy to share mine, but go ahead, Vice Mayor Way.
So just to clarify, if we agree to have a member of the city council submit an argument, it's as an individual council member or as an individual Larkspur resident? What's the title that goes associated with it?
I believe the assumption is that the council member you designated would be signing it as a council member. And all of you have the option to sign ballot arguments as council members with your title. So
Okay.
regardless of whether you take action tonight, you have the option on this measure, should you choose to offer to sign an argument one way or the other, to do so with your title.
Okay.
Other questions or thoughts?
And actually, one last question on the signatures. So can we sign as the Larkspur City Council as one signature, or does it have to be each individual name?
You can assume it's one name and then let the attorney say for sure.
It would have to be as individuals, but also to clarify, so the way the elections code is structured, this whole issue arises from it specifying that there is a priority in terms of selection of arguments if there is more than one submitted. And so the first priority goes to an argument submitted by a member of the city council authorized by the council to file the argument. All that's technically required is that a council member is authorized to and does submit the argument. The same council member does not have to sign it. But so the argument itself, the 5 signatures could be, if there were 5 council members sitting, it could be 5 council members, or it could be 0 council members. So you can, if a council member is authorized to file the argument, then it could be that council member or another council member who actually signs the argument. It could be any other combination of people who are authorized to sign the argument.
Okay. So I guess I'll share my thoughts. I think I think there is value in using our voices in terms of expressing, if we assuming that each of us as individuals and as voters of Larkspur have views on this particular initiative, I think there's value in collectively making a statement if we can get to that point. But I just don't know without having the conversation in terms of, how we're all feeling. But, if we're all sort of in the same direction, I do think that there is some value. I also am aware that there is a citizens group that is preparing an argument against. So there is an opportunity for us as individuals to sign on. I don't know about the argument for, but I'm assuming there's probably a citizens group also preparing an argument for. So, I do think that there's also, the opportunity either way, if if we wanted to. I think the challenge is we're looking at a pretty deadline that's coming up, and I don't know if any of us really want to write something in the next week. And it may just be easier to, draft onto whatever has been drafted already. So anyways, those are my thoughts.
All right, I appreciate that. So my thoughts are similar in the sense that, first of all, I'm not sure we are going to get consensus, of what that statement would say, and I would hate for it to not represent, the people on city council. But I think what I probably feel more strongly about is that I think that both groups, the group for and against, are very passionate about their position. And they should have the opportunity to give their argument on the ballot. I think if we said we wanted to write the ballot argument for, I think the group that is for this issue would probably be unhappy about it. because we probably wouldn't say it as well as they would say it, because we're probably not as passionate as they are about it. And similarly, I think the group that's against it, if we wrote it, probably wants their kind of, not to say their day in court, but their opportunity to give their argument. So I think we would be taking that from either side if we kind of preempted it and said, we are going to write it on behalf of everybody who feels that way. I think there's probably other ways if we wanted to voice our opinions, whether it be resolutions or editorials in the IJ or whatever we wanted to do to express our feelings on this. But I think that might, in my opinion, might be overstepping our role to usurp that limited space on the ballot and say it on behalf of one of the groups. So that's my thought on it, and I'm happy, like I said, to hear other people's thoughts, and I'm very flexible in most of my things here. So feel free to convince me otherwise if you feel otherwise. Vice Mayor Way.
I get that, Scott. I'm trying to square it with some of the conversation we had a couple of months ago when this was brought forward. A little frustration I felt that was voiced, that we spent over a year really, and Gabe was very instrumental, and we were working very hard with some subcommittees. We spent over a year and hundreds of public comments, and really, I feel worked. I mean, there was unhappiness on both sides, but I think we came to a compromised position that Gabe helped usher through. That was the best that we could do, considering all of the implications on the pros and cons of a rent control ordinance. And we really did public process for a year and a half, practically, a lot of long time meetings. And I felt from the collectiveness that we had brought it forward to the March ballot, and it passed. It squeaked by barely, but it did pass, and we accepted that as the outcome that process led to. And then it's now being preempted by another process that is not following that same pattern of public outreach and comment and all of those long hours of listening to testimony and reading testimony that Gabe led us through during that whole very tumultuous year. And I felt that frustration seemed to come from all of us, that now we're being supplanted. So if we're still feeling that way, maybe a ballot statement that expresses that, but I don't know. I'm not going to be the one to do it, because I've kind of been separated. I've tried to keep myself a little distanced from this, but how does that resonate with people? Because we did spend a tremendous amount of time and effort and conversation and one-on-one and listening to public comment, and we did craft an ordinance that came from that work.
Maybe it would make sense, and we wouldn't be in such a time crunch if we decided we wanted to make a statement on behalf of the council, similar to what you're saying. And that statement could be on our website perhaps, or it could be in an IJ editorial perhaps. Somehow that statement could be released, voicing our frustration, but yet not preempting one or the other groups from making their own statement. I mean, that's my only concern, is that, either side, that if we to take one side, we would be preventing that side from making their statement.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to put a thumb on the scale and like that. And I agree with that. But I mean, I just wanted to echo that I felt that frustration the last time we talked about this was how much effort our city staff went into crafting a really compromise, I think, position on this. So, but I get your point, and it may be best for us to take a advisory role on this.
Well, let's see what our other council members feel.
Yeah, I mean, First, I think Councilmember Way, I wouldn't, having gone through this with all of you, I wouldn't really categorize it as frustration. I think we had public process and now we have political process. What I'm hoping, what's really the best for the public, to create an informed voter, in my mind, is to have the full advocacy of those in favor, the full advocacy of those opposed, and we know those groups are out there. And then the role that's been in my heart and on my mind is to really remind the public of some of the serious considerations in the 9212, and also to remind the public of what Measure D was about. I did spend a lot of time, and I was probably the only person who could campaign, as Kevin Carroll was in hospice. And with 3,000, I went against 300,000 and I won. And I think that was partly because there was a chance for the merits of the arguments to be heard. And that's really what I wish for here. So, that's my statement of intention, is that we, the 9212, there's several points, and I have my notes up from our June meeting. There are at least 5 points that I think that the public really deserves to hear and needs to be spoken loudly. And then why Measure D was a good idea and what it might do as an anti-displacement ordinance versus a rent control ordinance, I think may be reiterated. And then I think it's really up to the public to decide.
So hang on, let me ask a question. What you just said, are you advocating for putting that on the ballot as an argument for or against, or are you advocating getting that to the public in a different way?
The problem with the original, the agenda item here is I think you have to, take a position for or against. I don't think there's a way to, San Anselmo is saying, look, we're just going to, allow some of you to speak for, some of you speak, and that's going to be, a balanced argument. I don't see a way our council could speak with a balanced voice. At least I don't feel I'm for or against this categorically. I really, said this on the dais last year. This will be a separate process. And we even said maybe we should off-ramp before Measure D. And I thought, no, let's actually see what happens without interest groups making the final decision. But now that, we are where we are, I would say this, clearly could go into the IJ. This could, be promulgated, in other ways. I don't know, staff, if there's any other way to put it on the ballot, where it's not rhetorically, a pro or a con.
There's no way to get something like that included in the voter information guide. The only things that can be included are the text of the initiative, the city attorney's impartial analysis, the arguments for and against, and the rebuttals. But the courts have said that the city council can adopt a resolution at an open meeting at which it states its position on a measure on the ballot. I just throw it out there as, in addition to the things that you've already mentioned about your individual campaigning and speaking or writing opinion pieces, is that if the council wanted to speak as one to address the points that you all have been raising about the process that the city council went through, the value of that it sees in the ordinance that it adopted that went through a referendum process, you can do that at a public meeting, and you can do it in an official form through a resolution. And the courts have said that that's an allowable use of your role as the city council.
And that doesn't have the August 19th deadline.
No, you could do that at any time during, obviously before election day or before ballots get sent out would be a reasonable time frame for something like that.
I mean, having really thought since the June meeting, I had that feeling like I know there's a range of opinions on the council. I mean, I thought that was the beauty of last year, is we really, in Kevin Carroll's, words, this is the sausage we made, we made something. And I think to bring that forward could serve the public. I think the resolution stating our position, I think we could say something where we're not being that polemic. We're really trying to, be advisory.
All right, so let me ask a question for staff. And this is, I guess, a Brown Act issue that if we want to have a statement that represents the council, it's very hard to come up with the wording of that statement at an open meeting? Is this something that one or two council members would take the lead and write it and pass it around? I mean, how do you come up with a statement and not violate the Brown Act?
My advice that probably the best process would be for you, Mr. Mayor, to either yourself or delegate to one or two of the council members the assignment to take a crack at a draft and then of some sort of statement. And then that would get agendized at a future meeting for the 5 of you to discuss. There isn't really a good way under the Brown Act for you to draft something and then send it to all 5 of you for comment. So really a committee of 2 is probably the best way to create a drafting situation, and then staff can work with you to either package that as a standalone statement or incorporate it into a resolution of some kind. The other thing, based on comments I'm hearing at the dais, it would be helpful, I think, offline, each of you could send me neutral information or analytical information that we've presented that's online, either on our website or elsewhere, that you feel voters should have access to. And it's my understanding we are allowed to educate the public, not we, the city, in our capacity. So we could certainly put all of that on a link and say to folks, these are educational resources for the community. Read them if you want to, right? Sort of statement. And I've heard Councilmember Paulson mention the 9212 report. I suspect as you think about this issue, there are different things we provided you all throughout the 14 months that you think are informative, and they're all up on our website, but maybe knowing from you, there's certain things you really want the voters to have up front and center. That would be helpful.
All right, so I want to open this up to the public, but it sounds like kind of where we are leaning is we are not going to take on the role of writing a position for the ballot. Maybe if we each want to, over the next couple of weeks, can send to staff what we think are the points that should be included in some resolution. Staff can then collate those comments, maybe put it together as a draft to present to council at some point. Does that sound reasonable?
That is another way to thread the needle of the Brown Act. As long as you don't share with each other, but send it to me, I can compile them for a future agenda item.
Okay. Any comments before I open it up to public? Okay. Anyone in the public like to comment on this issue? Come on up.
Wow. It's not over till it's over.
And then it's still not over.
Not sure even where to start. If you're concerned that this process might supplant in some way what we've all been involved with for 2 years, you're representing all of the public, including both sides of this argument. And so you can't be supplanted and we can't be supplanted. Because there's so many registered voters that are all part of this. And if anyone's feeling frustration, imagine how some of us must be feeling on this side of the equation in terms of frustration. I know some of you probably own homes. So as far as frustration goes, what if your mortgages went up all of a sudden 10% one year, and then the next year your mortgages went up 8%, and then the next year your mortgages went up another 7%, and you don't even see anything in sight that would change that, how would you feel? Wouldn't you be at least frustrated? And yet that's what we've had to endure and continue to endure. And almost every week, I hear about a neighbor who's had to leave the community. So it's having real consequences for us. And I just don't want this to be like or feel like the even field is being changed somehow, or there are hands or fingers or something being put on the scales. And you're all very well aware of the position that you're in terms of influencing the public and your constituents. So I think a level playing field is important. Not that you have to be neutral as people, as persons, because nobody is. Everybody has opinions about everything. But in a sense, your position is unique. And so part of the responsibility, I think, is a level of neutrality, if that's even the right word. Those are just some of my thoughts, just hearing the conversation. It is political. But at a certain level, what isn't? So it's all part of the process. And part of that process is political, but part of it is something else, and then something else. The Skylark Trends Association did write something up, and I've got it in my phone, and it's being submitted to the council. And I don't want to just sit here and read this thing that was written up, because it just covers areas that we've covered for the last 2 years. So after I spoke here last time, going home, I had these other thoughts that somehow corporate landlords and large, even local landlords have somehow successfully put a wedge between you and your elected, and your constituency. At a certain level, we're on the same side. We're Larkspur, we're constituents here, we live here. And people submitting extra cash to Wall Street investors are not part of that equation, really. And I feel a wedge has been put and inserted between a relationship that we, by definition, have as representatives and constituents. And I just feel it's sad that people who are truly outside of our community can put this wedge between us, where it comes to a kind of black and white situation where there really is no such thing. It's always gradations of gray. And just those are some of the thoughts that I've been having tonight and since the last time I spoke here. Not sure how much sense that makes. Not sure if you need anything else from me. But like I said, this statement is being submitted at the STA road, and you could see, a response to the agenda item that you were going to discuss this, see how you could move forward with it and that kind of thing. So I'd rather not read that statement. It's been submitted, but these are just some of the thoughts that I've been having. So
Thank you, Richard. Seeing no one else from the public, I will close public comment at this point. Does the staff have sufficient direction, or let me pull it back to council? Do any council members have any other comments they'd like to make on this item?
Not tonight.
Vice Mayor Way? Nope. Okay, staff, do we have?
I do have sufficient direction, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. With that, I will close business item 8.3 and slide into item 9, which is adjournment. Thank you all very much. Have a fantastic night, and we will not be here for the next scheduled meeting. Just a reminder, the next scheduled meeting is on what date?
The next meeting where you will convene is September 4th.
September 4th. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.